4 years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting John Honerkamp at a New Balance race down on Cape Cod. Since then, John has given me some of the best running advice I've received. In other words, John is an amazing running coach, not to mention a very accomplished collegiate runner, which led to him running at the 1996 Olympic trials. Now, over the past few years, John has paced and trained many celebrities for and during the New York City Marathon. But what I really love is what he's done over the past few years, launching a few of his running organizations, the RunKamp and the Run Collective, both of which we'll 100% be talking about in this interview. Overall, John is genuinely an impressive and very inspiring person to talk to. This man just makes you want to go out and run. John, when did you fall in love with running?
I was fortunate enough to get introduced to running like at a really early age. I had an uncle who was a bartender. His lifestyle was not conducive to wellness or life balance. You know, he worked late nights, and so he was training for the New York City Marathon in the early 80s. And he also happened to be my next door neighbor. So he would take me to like the 5K and 10K road races that he was using to help prep him for the New York City Marathon. And I was, again, 5, 6, 7 years old. And I started running like the kids or the, you know, all-comers fun run 1 mile. And that's kind of my early introduction to running. And it was pretty positive because I had a decent engine for a 6-year-old, but my experience was like challenging myself, being around adults, hanging out with my uncle. And, you know, he kept bringing me to races. And as I got older, I eventually graduated from the mile fun run or the kids mile to the 5K, which is a pretty big difference, especially if you're 6 or 7 years old. And then that was like my early introduction to running.
And now from there, you went on to run in college. I saw that you ran at St. John's.
Yeah, so then I got to like grade school and I did CYO track, again, just outdoors. We probably had 3 or 4 meets. We practiced once a week, but I definitely had a knack for it. I enjoyed it. And then freshman year of high school was when I really did it kind of more serious, where we had cross country, indoor track and outdoor track. So we really 3 different seasons throughout August to June. And I was fortunate to have great coaches, and we also had a very good team. So like the seniors, my freshman year, won the national title on the 4x800 meter relay. So that was the bar as a freshman, these guys above me doing really well. So when I was a senior, I was able to replicate that with my classmates, and we won the national title in the 4x800 meter relay. And then I ran well enough in cross country and other distances that I got a full scholarship to St. John's. And then, you know, started there in 1993 and ran there. And then in my junior year, I had a really good breakthrough. And it was kind of like just a coincidence that my breakthrough coincided with the Olympic trials, which also coincided with the Olympic Games being in Atlanta. So I ran the Olympic trials in, I don't know, July of 1996 as a 20-year-old. And I was ended up advancing a few rounds, and I was 20 years old. I was the youngest semifinalist in the 800 meters. But that was kind of, I went from like a pretty good college runner to like next level, where it qualified me for NCAAs. And luckily I had coaches along the way that never burnt me out, because I was able to run professionally for a couple of years. And there's definitely a lot of stories where kids peak in high school or get disinterested in college. I just got better and better each year. And I feel very fortunate because I've had a lot of friends and colleagues that, you know, had a great year early and then kind of, you know, petered out a little bit. I definitely was a love-hate relationship too. I didn't always love it. I didn't always do well. Like I wasn't always consistent, but I was fortunate enough to be introduced to running at an early age, and then had good people around me and good direction. And obviously had the drive and the determination and whatever other factors that motivated me. But, and now I've kind of made it a career. That's how you and I know each other, is through running.
So when you say professional, I think from the outside looking in, a lot of people just assume that as runners, professional means competing in the Olympics. But there's a whole other world out there that I discovered. But I think for the most people, they don't know that like you can run professional and there's all these other meets and other ways to, I guess, make money while running as well.
Yes, it's actually unique because it's not like my college coach used to always say, like, say 1 year I finished, say, you know, 10th or 12th at the USA's. And that's pretty good. And if he would say, you know, if you're the 13th best point guard in the NBA or the 13th best shortstop in Major League Baseball, you're doing pretty well for yourself. Well, I was the 13th best 1500 meter runner, and I was making $300 a month with Reebok, and the Reebok Enclave was a team. It was a post-collegiate group based out of Georgetown University. So if you graduate college and you're still like you're a pretty good runner and you want to continue, now if you're like a Galen Rupp or a Matt Centrovich Jr. or some of these other big names out of college, you might get some, a signing bonus from a Nike or Brooks or a New Balance. But most people are like me, and you're kind of like a starving artist. So when I say professional, it's not a brag. It's more of I was like foregoing normal or income, the opportunity cost. Instead of being at like my first entry level job, I was working part time at an acupuncture school, collecting tuition and paying professors so I can run full time. And so there's definitely, and then even the Olympic trials, Olympics are on a 4-year cycle. And this year it was 5-year because of COVID. So next cycle will be 3 to catch up. But it's really something that's not really glamorous. You really have to kind of love it. And you're usually foregoing or pushing back or putting on hold a traditional job, path.
I see. Now, somewhere between that, you transition into marathon distance.
Yeah, to be honest, I actually was an 800 meter, 1500 meter runner. So when I say I'm not a marathoner, I've run 13 or 14 marathoners. So I'm absolutely a marathoner. You've run a marathon, so you're a marathoner. So don't ever tell everyone that you're not a marathoner. But when I say that, I mean, my specialty was 2 laps or 4 laps around a track. So I consider myself a middle distance runner, even though I don't compete in those events anymore. That would be really painful, and I don't train for that. But when I was 36, I wasn't a particular age or anything. It was more, I was done competing at a professional level. I was still involved in the sport. I was coaching college at the time, track and field and cross country at St. John's University. I was getting my master's in business. And then a year later, I joined New York Roadrunners. But before that, on the staff, I was like, I gotta run a marathon. My uncle ran a marathon in 1883, got me into it. And I'm from New York, so I got to run the marathon. It was my favorite day of the city. A favorite day of the year in the city was the marathon because everyone comes out in full force. And so I ran my first marathon when I was 36, ran pretty well, but my goal was just to train and enjoy the training and not get hurt, because I know a lot of people get injured in the training process, and that, they run the race anyway because they're raising money or there's some other reason why they're running. And I was very afraid of that. So I wanted to really enjoy that race. And then since then, most of my races actually have been pacing celebrities. Mm-hmm. So I've run 9 New York City marathons in a row. First one was for me. The last 8 were me pacing people like Carly Kloss and Summer Sanders and Caroline Wozniacki, the tennis player, and James Blake, the tennis player. And so it's been, I still have to run the marathon and train. I think the year you ran, I forget what year it was, but I was training some celebrity and ran with them. So I definitely have run marathons, but it's definitely been more, actually, it's been professional in the sense that I've been paid to train or coach people versus getting paid to compete as an elite athlete.
So 2 things. I want to get on the pacing part, but I also want to thank you because you and I met and I had a conversation with you about form. And I'm like, I think in our conversation, I realized, and you made me see that I was thinking too much about form. And you gave me the whole analogy of like, well, do you think about form when you're getting chased? I'm like, no, I'm just running. And you told me that and you painted it like that. And like, ever since that, I stopped thinking about form. And it made my runs like so enjoyable, where I was going out and actually enjoying it versus thinking about, am I running this way? So first of all, thank you. And then the other part, I'm fascinated by the pacing of how it works. Do you keep pace on your watch? How do you keep the runners motivated and still kind of like, because I mean, I've been in marathons where the experience has sucked and I found myself walking a little more than I had planned. What is the whole pacing aspect like, and like, what are the challenges behind it?
Yeah, for sure. So first off, I started coaching a group recently, and the first question I get from runners is, "Oh, I want you to look at my form." I went to my old high school in Long Island the other day, and the president of the school is new into running, and he's like, "Oh, let's meet to talk about my form." And I said the same thing to them as I said to you. If you're getting chased by a dog, you're going to run a certain way. So like, get out of your head. Unless you're getting injured all the time, there's like a chronic issue, that's when I really take a look at form. But if you're just running and you're pretty healthy and so it's, I like to think about form the most when I'm hurting, whether that's the end of a marathon or an end of a long run or a track session. I'll think about form to kind of make sure I'm being as most efficient as I can be. It's also an art of distraction where you're thinking about what your hands are doing or your arms are doing versus how bad you're feeling. And that kind of brings me to the fact that I mentioned art of distraction. As a pacer, I'm often, as a coach, I'm really being a master at distracting the subject or my pacee. Really just trying to get them through, and sometimes it's just kind of not thinking about the pain. And again, most of the marathons should be pretty easy. It's where it gets hard at the end because that's why it's so great. It's the marathons are hard, but they're pretty easy in the beginning. You're not running very hard. It's 5K, 10K, taking it all in, which makes it really easy to go out too fast, especially in a race as epic as New York City Marathon, where the start, as you know, is like you're waiting for 4 or 5 hours, you're all this nervous energy, and then the cannons go off and you're released over to the bridge and looking at the skyline, and it's very easy to get overexcited. So especially if it's your first time or first New York. So whether I'm pacing a group or pacing a person, and I'm pacing a group, like you have a lot of pacing groups out there where there's a 4-hour pacer and a 3:30 pacer. They're instructed to run like an even pace. So it's not like they're running 9 minutes uphill, then 9 minutes downhill. It's just a kind of a feel. And you want to take a little time to get there, maybe a couple miles and lock in and really settle into a pace. But if I'm pacing an individual, it's sometimes easier if I've coached them, because if I coached you for 12 weeks and we were meeting every week, I kind of know your like things about you, even if it's form or breathing or even what you're doing to help understand what you should be shooting for. I've also paced people like Caroline Wozniacki or Paula Ono, where I had no idea what their training was. Caroline was in the middle of like the US Open, which is we're in now. She did really well that year training for the marathon. And she, I think it was after her last tennis match, she ran the New York City Marathon and she ran 3:26. So she did pretty well. Wow. But I had to kind of like, sometimes I have to lie to the athletes because, I want to make sure that like, we're not getting too ahead of ourselves. But pacing is an art. And you need, a lot of the more, kind of like the 10,000 hour rule where you got to do something for a while to kind of get better at it. It's a skill, it's an art. And even pacing someone, you're almost like a detective on the spot, where listening to breathing patterns, other signs, can they talk? If they had an injury, how's that kind of playing out on race day? So form is related to obviously your first part of the question, but definitely part of the pacing piece of it is really obviously you got to do the training, but pacing is super important in a marathon because it's so easy to overshoot or undershoot. And that really can affect later stages of the races, which is, obviously it's going to be tough, which makes it great, but we don't need to make it as difficult as a lot of us make it by going out too fast.
Yeah. Especially again, you talked about the energy in the beginning. It's like you get excited and it's hard to keep yourself, at least for me, it's hard to slow myself down and kind of like, hey, you're going out way too fast. So can imagine if you're having a pacer there or somebody that's in like a bigger group, it's a better experience, especially from the aspect of like, enjoy it, slow it down, and pace out this entire race. Don't come out like too hard, where on the back end of it, you might get a serious dose of reality, which I did the first year.
And when I'm pacing people, it's usually like, a high profile person, maybe there's a security detail, maybe there's oftentimes there's a media component. So I'm managing that. I'm almost like a Sherpa. And so obviously it's unique because it's a high status person. So Carly Kloss, we had paparazzi following us and we had security guards. So that's obviously, but we want the athlete, whether they're someone who's like not a celebrity, not a former athlete at a high level or a supermodel, they still have to run 26 miles. They still have to go to the bathroom. They still have to fuel. They still have to pace properly. I just try to take away all that worry and just say, hey, listen, I got you. We're going to run this pace. Every mile I'll check in with them. With Apollo, I was lying to him because in a good way, not being deceitful in a negative way, but he knew he needed to run sub-8s to break his goal, which was sub 3:30, which is how I got brought into it, because Subway, which was his sponsor at the time, was going to donate $26,200 to the Special Olympics if Apollo broke 4 hours. Now, they obviously could do that anyway. They don't need him, but it was more like a PR gimmick. And then he started spouting off that he wanted to break 3:30, and Subway got really worried. If he tries to break 3:30 and is not able to or goes out too fast, it jeopardizes the 4-hour goal of getting the money for Special Olympics. So that's how I first got into it. I just got pulled off the sidelines and said, hey, we need someone on race day to make sure this guy doesn't go out too fast. And I knew that we needed to run sub-8s, but the first couple of miles, I didn't know he was training. So I was running 8:20s, 8:30s, and we ended up running a 4.5 minute negative split, which is tough to do in New York. But I was hedging my bet a little bit, not really understanding the lay of the land of his training. But for him, luckily for me, he didn't have a watch. So he'd say, "Oh, what was that split?" And I would say, like, say it was 8:21. I'd be like 7:50. But I was just doing that to kind of figure out where we were. So there was some deceit there, but it was for Special Olympics. Got their money that day. So, but it is really it is tough because sometimes I have someone who wants to break a certain time. Like we had the guy Neve Schulman from Catfish, and he's a really good athlete. I trained with him a couple of times, but he wanted to break 3 hours, and I said, Neve, I think you can break 3 hours in like 2 years, but not the first time out. And so sure enough, he broke 3 hours like his third time. But the first time he blew up a little bit. And the second time I actually paced him and we ran a 13-minute PR for him, ran about 3:21. But I just knew that he wasn't, sub 3 hours is no joke. You're qualifying for Boston. That's, it's pretty good. So most people just want to, they want to finish and they're not worried about time. And in some cases there is a time goal, and sometimes it's easy to be stubborn. If you miss training, or sometimes you're undershooting. Maybe you can run 3:30 instead of 4. Oftentimes it's the other way around, where you want to run a certain, whether it's your boss's time or your spouse's time or your brother's time, or the magic 2:59 or 3:29 or 3:59 or 4:59, whatever that is. Sometimes it's trying to make sure that the goal is realistic for the athlete, and that's not always a smooth conversation, because you kind of have to kind of battle with someone and kind of prove to them, hey, this is where you're at, this is where you should be shooting for. But anyway, for the pacing piece, it's really managing the day and making sure that I'm doing all the worrying for the athlete and they can just enjoy the day. And not everyone has the luxury of having someone next to him kind of him or her holding their gels and making sure they're doing certain things and getting water for them and bringing it to them. And so it's a little VIP treatment, but they still have to walk the event, and I'm not running any piece of it for them. So there's a lot of, I think, connectivity with the marathon, whether you're a pro or someone who's back of the pack or some VIP person. I think Mark Messier, you know that name from hockey?
Yeah.
I think he ended up in the hospital after the marathon. He didn't train as much as he wanted to, or probably because of schedules, which is often the case. Was like Carly Kloss, I ran with her like sometimes 4 times in a week, sometimes not in a month, because she was traveling. And I think he had such a bad go of it the last bit of the marathon. He ended up like dehydrated, and he's someone who you think of as this ironclad person who's a tough guy, and he's in the hospital after the marathon. So you got to respect the distance, and however way you do it, it's we want it to be as smooth as possible. But there's the beauty of it is it's a hard event, and that's why I think not everyone toes the line. So there's definitely, and I think you learn a lot about yourself race day when you battle yourself. But I think what I learned the most about 2012, when Hurricane Sandy came through and canceled the race. Now, of course, we had last year's canceled because of COVID. But Hurricane Sandy was more unique in the sense it was like a storm like we just had with Ida. It came in, race got canceled, and the amount of thank yous I got from people I coached were like, hey, I'm sorry I can't run the race, but thank you for helping me. I lost 25 pounds, or I came off blood pressure medication. And I always tell that story. That runner doesn't have to go back on blood pressure medication because they didn't run the marathon. They don't like gain the 25 pounds back because they didn't run the race. Now, we obviously want to run the race, but it made me really think of the cheesiness of that. Training for a marathon is like, life happens and it's a journey. And that sounds cheesy, but it's absolutely true when you're training for the marathon or do anything else that's a hard goal that you have to make sacrifices for. So, I mean, you've been through it a couple of times. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
And that's what I found, that like the training was tough, but I set the goal, but also just how it relates and translates into life. It's like, set a goal in life to obtain a job or whatever it is. It's like you put in the work. Sometimes it's not going to go as you plan, but at the end of the day, you're going to learn a lot about yourself, but also too that you can accomplish it. And I think for the marathon, for me personally, like I had gotten to a place where I had put on weight. I was unhappy with my position at work, and I just wasn't really feeling life like that. I'm like, but the marathon got me back into this kind of groove where I'm like, you know what, fitness is fun again. This whole marathon thing is amazing, and I got out of my rut in my personal life, and it just transformed my life like all around. So That's why like I initially fell in love with running, and now like 4 years now, I'm like, dude, this is amazing. And I'm like kind of back into this weird space with COVID had just hit. I put the weight back on a bit. Now I'm like, you know what? Let's do this again because I had fun the first time around. But now my mindset is so like, this is going to happen. I can accomplish it. Same with any aspect in life too.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I mean, I find that a lot of runners come to running. I mean, the beauty of running is you don't need equipment other than a pair of shoes, really. And it's really, you don't need 5-on-5, you don't need a court. You can just walk out your door, and get the running. And obviously there's a safety factor and there's other factors involved, but there's a lot of less barriers of entry to running than other sports, let's put it that way. And so, I often, when people as adults come to me and they want to get back into running, whether it's they had a family or they were runners in their past and they took a break, or maybe they're just new to it, is, oh, running was like a punishment in my youth. It was, okay, I was goofing off on the basketball court, so the coach made us do laps. Or oftentimes it's I played football in grade school. And I remember just suffering in pads, and this is like the 1980s, but like doing laps, and, it's August and you're practicing for the season and you're not in great shape. I mean, you're a kid, so you're in pretty good shape, but like, you're not used to doing some of the exercise you would do, all summer. And running was either a punishment for other sports for goofing off preseason conditioning, or it was some embarrassing gym class experience where everyone's wearing like this matching outfit that doesn't fit them. And so they have a terrible relationship with running because it was really hard. It was punishment. It made them feel bad. And when they come to running as an adult on their own terms, where they're training for a marathon or just trying to get in some fitness. And I think coming out of COVID, as you've noticed, like self-care is like a buzzword, which is great. And mental health is something that people talk about, whether you're Osaka with tennis or Simone Biles with the Olympics, with the elite side of it. That obviously helps shed light on the overall picture. But I do my best thinking when I'm running by myself, as much as like to run with groups. But in COVID, we had to run by ourselves. So I think people come to running and realize, oh, running's actually not this terrible thing. And obviously and everyone can get better at it. You just have to do it a little bit, not too much too soon to get injured. But I just find it's very, the barrier of entry is often mental, whether it's nostalgic, mental, like bad memory, or like, I'm not a runner. And I get this all the time. Oh, and especially if they know I have like an elite background, which, by the way, the Olympic trials was 25 years ago. So I'm not competing with that same body. Sometimes I have that same mind, but they're like, oh, they apologize to me. Like, oh, sorry, you have to coach me. I'm not this real runner. And I'm like, wait a second, what's a fake runner? Unless you're dressed up as Forrest Gump or Flojo or Steve Prefontaine or whatever your favorite runner is for Halloween, then maybe you could be a fake runner. Otherwise, your running is just putting one foot in front of the other and leaving the ground. I would say, you have young kids, you're often chasing after them so they don't like get hurt. You're running. You just have to chase a lot of kids or chase a lot of buses or chase a lot of subways to train for a marathon. And I think people think of running as this thing it's pretty simple. It can be pretty simple, but oftentimes I think we make it a little bit more difficult. And it is tough to start that first day, that first couple of weeks. I'm not saying that's easy, but it's oftentimes you being self-conscious. I had a woman today who joined our group for the first time. I said the toughest part was today, you showing up. The anxiety and joining a group brings you back to grade school, when they would say it's tough to meet friends as adults, right? Unless you have like kids and your kids have friends, and that's kind of how you meet adults these days. I think it's tough to put yourself out there. And I think today, that woman, Marissa today was, I said, next Thursday is gonna be a lot easier because you showed up today. And I'm sure she was like, the alarm went off, it was dark out, and she's like, I gotta join this group. Why did I do this? And then she showed up, and a beautiful day. She met new people. We sweated, and I said, you're doing great. And so I'm sure there's a lot of things in life we don't want to do, but there's a big payoff for a lot of them.
It's funny. You mentioned mental health, and I talk about this all the time. I see a therapist because with work, I feel like the work that I do, it's not challenging physically, but it's challenging mentally, where like, especially in the world of Instagram and all that stuff, like one comment, all that hate that we're starting to see everywhere, that divisiveness, it like gets to you. So I found therapy to be so beneficial for me personally, but I've also told people that some of the best therapy I've ever done has been running and just clearing my mind with all the thoughts. And I feel like that's another part of it. The world today, it's like there's so much hate out there, but running allows me to shut it off and just get the thoughts in and out and just get everything out. So that's another thing that I've experienced on that note when you were talking about the mental health aspect of running.
Funny, because if you start running now, or even in the last 10 or 15 years, I often talk to people and they're shocked that I don't run with music. And my joke is, and it's true, it's like, oh, well, for me to run, I started running in 1982. So for me to run with music, I'd be like carrying a boombox with like headphones, or you probably, I think, I don't know, I think I'm a little bit older than you, but you might remember the Sport Walkman, the yellow.
Mm-hmm.
You're like running with it. I mean, so I never did it. I think once maybe I tried running with a Discman. That's how old I am. And it just was, I got used to running when that wasn't an option. Well, now the things are this big, or now they're even in your watch, and there's Bluetooth and stuff. So I think if I was going to start now, like whether it's listening to a podcast, but I'm very grateful that I don't have that. I want to say crutch to some degree, or that kind of like security blanket of, oh, I got my music. Which happens actually in a race, for example, if your phone dies or whatever, your music device dies and you don't have that music and you're running the marathon, it's good to not have that to lean on. So I always recommend, if you do run with music or podcasts, try to do some days without it, because on race day, for whatever reason, you forget your music, or something, the battery dies on something, you're not like freaking out. But I do my best thinking when I'm running, and I'm my most creative. I'm out there, I'm in nature, I'm daydreaming. Sometimes it's intentional, where I have something on my mind that's bothering me. Other times it's just kind of this floating. I'm just kind of like doing a workout. And I often find that this is kind of a fun thing, interesting thing. On Tuesdays, I do kind of my track session, and that's whether I'm training for a marathon or not. I think it stems from my track background, where Tuesday I do like intervals, whether that's, going to a track and doing repeat 400s, or finding a stretch or a hill in a park and just doing repetitions of that. But when I'm pushing myself, I find that my biggest problems come to the surface, and I'm like, it kind of like drowns everything else. I don't know what it is about, I'm pushing myself and I'm battling, and everything melts away except like the one thing that's probably my biggest issue at that period of time. And I've noticed that over the last couple of years. I'm like, that's kind of I don't know, it's almost like being a detective, and you're kind of like getting away all these clues, or sifting gold, where you're just trying to get everything out, and then all of a sudden there's clarity there. So whether I'm running easy and daydreaming, I'm creative and I kind of problem solve. Or if I'm running a hard workout, I often will something will creep into my head where, okay, I gotta address this because it's coming up. It's kind of like, if you dream about something that's bothering you, it's maybe something you should be addressing. So yeah, I just think that and again, it's funny. I think if you would have called me a jogger 20 years ago, I probably would have been upset, because I'm not a jogger. I'm this real runner. I'm a competitive athlete. I ran the Olympic trials. I'm, Olympic, whatever. I'm like, I realized I was doing a lot of jogging back then, because easy runs or jogs, recovery is super important. So I embrace my joggerness. Although I do run a lot, I think a lot of time it's just easy running and putting one foot in front of the other and moving. And I always tell people this: no one typically cares about your pace except you. So get out of your head, get out the door. And it's like, after a race, how'd you do? Oh, I ran great. All right, I did okay. No one's like, what's your pace? That's something that if you care about, no one else does. Hate to inform you of that, but so don't get outside your head. There's no fast and slow is relative. So like you might run better than me. I might beat you in a race time-wise, but you might have had a great race. I might have had a terrible race because I paced whatever. And so I just know it's everything's relative, training's relative, hard and easy are relative, fast and slow are relative. That goes with life too, right?
The first year I cared about time. Since then, I just want to finish happy and have a good time. And that to me that felt so much better than worrying about time the entire time. So that's a valid point there.
Yeah. In a marathon, I say you don't have to care about what the mile splits. If you don't care about time, and people often have, this is the most common goal, and it's to just finish. I would say take the word just out of it. Why are you minimizing? Your goal is to finish. It's a phenomenal goal. But by saying just finish, you're already telling everyone like, oh, I'm less than, I'm not a runner, I'm not speedy, I'm not trying to qualify for Boston, I'm just trying to raise money for this charity. And it's like, own that. Like, you're there to run. And your goal is to finish. Now, if you don't care about your time, that's fine. But you do need to know what pace you're running, because that's going to affect, fueling and other things. So I say you don't have to care about what your mile splits add up to at the end of the day, but you should know that you're supposed to run 9:30s instead of 10s, or 10s versus 9:30s. So you get to mile 20 and you're gassed, or like you're starting to walk. So there's definitely again, pacing is relative, and you can care about it. Often I think there's an A, B, or C goal typically people have, like, oh, best case I run this time, and the C goal is usually just finish. And that's fine. You can have multiple goals, and there's best case scenarios, and there's maybe less so, but don't minimize running and your goal, and apologize for being slow, because I would say one of the biggest fears about joining a group is getting last. And I would say there's a big tie for last. It's everyone who's not there, sitting home on the couch. So you got them beat. My brother came. My brother actually lost a lot of weight a couple of years ago and got into running, and I was taking him to some races. I took him to a track race indoors, which is typically speedier, like an indoor track meet. I know up in Boston, there's a couple of them. And I'm like, my pitch to him was, don't worry, you won't get last. Because there's like these old timers there that are like 80 years old running in their age group. And like 2 races he ran, he was dead last in both. So my pitch didn't work, but no, he didn't care. He was so happy to be running, and he lost like 50 pounds. So like he was more ecstatic even that he was towing the line, let alone the 80-year-old age group are beating him. So it backfired a little bit, but I still got him there, and he had a good time.
Before we go, I want to ask you about these 2 organizations that you started. The first one is RunKamp, and the second one is the Run Collective, which I've read about them. They sound like really amazing. You're doing a lot of great things for the community. You want to talk about RunKamp and the Run Collective?
Yeah, RunKamp is just my consulting business. When I first left New York Roadrunners to just do things in running, I think people were concerned, like, oh, how could you leave talking about taking a risk, right? I found that like in my competitive running, when I took the most risks is when I got the most reward. Now they were calculated, I trained, they weren't just like off the cuff. They were like, but there was a way about them. And so when I left New York Roadrunners, it was a big risk because I didn't have any clients necessarily. So I remember one of the higher ups at New York Roadrunners was like kind of almost offended that I was leaving their organization and didn't have anything lined up. It wasn't like I was going to go work for the NFL or even you and I starting a consulting business. It was just me going out, and I actually didn't have a name for it. So I needed to come up with a name for the LLC for just legal documents in the state. So I just called it John Honerkamp LLC, which was just my name. But after a year or two, I was like, wait a second, my last name's Honerkamp with a K. I do everything I'm doing is running related. So I just kind of renamed my business RunKamp, which is just like, my day job is me consulting for groups like New Balance, Strava, Brooks, various running organizations. So that's my day job. Run Collective is something I started around the same time as RunKamp, but that was more of casual in the sense that I was so busy putting on running events and doing stuff in the running space, and I admired others that were doing similar stuff. But thanks to Instagram, as far as there's obviously pros and negatives to social media, but I was seeing a lot of activity and a lot of events happening in the New York City area where there's no shortage of running groups and running events, whether they're legit races or these rogue races. And it was great to see. And I was like, oh, I'd love to connect with some of these folks, but we're all busy putting on things. And I said, this has to be a need for some like people, like-minded people where like we're doing different things to meet, to celebrate each other, get to know each other, and then say, hey, how can we collaborate? Hey, let's not put an event on the same day. So then my group can go to your group and your folks can go to my folks, and I can volunteer for your event, and we can just help each other. And this is before obviously the last 2 years with social justice and even specifically the Ahmaud Arbery tragedy, where it was one of us runners was murdered on a run. And one of the things I started at Run Collective was Runner Safety Awareness Week, where mainly started with a lot of female runners getting attacked and harassed and even murdered on runs. This is like 2 years before Ahmaud Arbery's tragedy. I was just more interested in how could we be all safer. So initially it started as casual, let's grab some beers, let's toast each other, let's network, how can we help each other? Pretty casual, but well intended. And then after about 2 years, I realized I thought there'd be something that would come up that would be like more important. And for me, that was runner safety. I was like, there was a woman, Molly Tibbetts from Iowa, that got attacked, oddly, Brooklyn, Iowa, and I'm from Brooklyn. So nothing to do with Iowa, except the fact that the name of her city is where I live. And when she got, unfortunately, attacked and murdered brutally on a run, like it was mainstream news, and the running community got wind of it. And there was a big outcry of like run miles for Molly hashtags, and like the running community really rallied, just like you actually saw with Ahmaud Arbery. What it made me realize is that someone who's a leader in the community in the running space. Wait a second, this happened in, I guess, over the summer of 2018. And it made me think that in 2016, there was 3 women in 9 days that were attacked and murdered on a run. And so I was like, this happened once with Molly, which is a tragedy, but it got me thinking, wait a second, this happened 3 times in 9 days. One here in Queens, New York, one up in Boston, a woman who worked at Google from New York City was traveling, visiting her mom, and then a woman out in Michigan. Just like three occurrences in 9 days. And I felt really ashamed and disappointed in myself. But wait a second, this happened 3 times in 1 week, basically. And I didn't do anything to change my behavior. As a coach, I didn't tell people to be safer. And I realized there's not a lot of education and talk about runner safety. And oftentimes there's like, maybe indirectly, it's almost like victim shaming or blaming. Oh, that poor runner, that woman shouldn't have been running by herself. We just talked about running by ourselves as one of our greatest gifts to ourselves and the mental health. So the Run Collective became casual. It got a little more serious, runner safety. And then you had the tragedy last year with Ahmaud Arbery being attacked and brutally murdered on a run. And what was interesting was more like Malcolm Gladwell kind of question of like, wait a second, why did this get such mainstream attention with the one incident, and the 3 incidents got really hardly any? And it turned out that there was a political motivation behind the Molly Tibbetts incident. And so it was very quickly, I found out why it was, politicized, and it got into illegal immigrant and building a wall and that type of conversation, which is why it bubbled up to the mainstream. I don't want to say silver lining because it's a tragedy, but it got people to know about it, and the awareness piece kicked in. And I was impressed with the running community, as you probably found, even just in the Boston area here in New York, where everyone rallied around each other. And I felt like, wait a second, this happened to 3 of our runners a year and a half ago, and I didn't hear anyone talking about it. Runners World wasn't talking about it. New York Road Runners wasn't talking about it. Coach John wasn't talking about it. So I don't want to just point fingers. I was like, okay, what could I do? And so I just created Runner Safety Awareness Week, which is a made up thing, but I figured there's Donut Day and there's National Beer Day. So it's not that running's not safe. Obviously you got to check with your doctor, and everyone has, just bypasses the waivers when you sign up for a race. But there's no education on it. I went to running camps all my life. You had the boys talk and the boys talk at camp. It was like no means no. And then there was like girls talking about their menstrual cycles and diet, which is even stereotypical, and just the fact that you separate the two and talk about those things that are important. But what about like running by yourself, the do's and don'ts, self-defense? There's ways to be safer. And I felt like I was really disappointed with some of the running organizations that were just like, we like what you're doing, but, and I was like, I think you have a responsibility as a runner, whether you're a parent, a brother, a spouse, but in my case, a coach. And then if you work for an organization that, puts running shoes on people or apparel on people or running watches, and so there's definitely more people doing more work, but not to get too serious on you. The RunKamp is my business, and Run Collective is a casual group, which now become a little bit more formal because of the initiative of Runner Safety Awareness Week, and just making sure that people are safer. We're not going to there's obviously things that can happen that are tough to predict, and that means getting hit by a car. It's not always these attacks. There's just, we had a race this past summer in China where 21 people died because of the hail. Yeah. So it's running. I realize runner safety is like people getting attacked by a mountain lion in Colorado. It's not just like getting harassed and catcalled. It's very broad, and we've done it for the last 3 years. And each year I feel like I'm not doing enough because there's so many different layers to it. But
it's something that I guess is not thought about as much as it should be and or talked about. But how about we do this? How about, to give it the attention it needs, how about we do this again over the next month or so, and we focus just on the safety?
Again, I'm a white male, heterosexual, so I'm probably the most privileged demographic. Mm-hmm. But even in the city, like my biggest fear of running is going out and slipping on black ice.
Yeah.
Like that's if it's icy, I don't like the treadmill. No, nothing against the treadmill. I just like to be outdoors in nature. And and if it's cold, you wear layers. You're from the Boston area; it gets pretty cold. Yeah. But if you're female, you're more at risk. If you're a minority, you're more at risk. I know a lot of my friends, they say, I have to think about what I wear. So a minority friend will go out and run, and they'll overdo it with running headband and basically screaming I'm running. I'm not I'm not, so that's something that I grew up with track and field, and I went to St. John's University in the most diverse borough in the U.S. So I definitely was in different. Running to me is very diverse, but running and distance running is not, especially when you deal with some of these runner trade shows and some of the executives. But I used to say this a lot, and I stopped saying it when I kind of educated myself just based on what's going on in the world. Is you often hear, and I almost said it a little bit, but I said I changed my tune a little bit. When you say all you need is a pair of shoes. Well, if you're a white male, probably, but if you're female, there's other things to think about. Not that like I'm immune to like getting attacked, but it's rare. And so based on what you look like and who you are, how are you, what sexual orientation you have, what religious belief you're associated with, when you go out to the world, whether that be running, and actually the tagline for Runner Safety Awareness Week was be a good run citizen. And that kind of graduated to be a better run citizen, because you can actually take the word run out. It's really just being a good person and looking out for each other as part of the safety thing, is obviously making yourself safe. But when you're out there running early in the morning, late at night, there's this behavior you can utilize that's like not sneaking up on someone, crossing the street if you feel like you're going to be perceived as a threat to someone. So there's things that I'm still learning, but it's runner safety, I feel like, needs to be discussed. And I think some of the running brands do a decent job. I work with Brooks now, full disclosure. They have a whole full line of reflective gear called the Visalign. And that's like really, and they put a lot of money into like how the eyes work and how drivers see runners. And that's definitely a part of runner safety. I definitely think we just should be continuing the conversation of, hey, running's pretty safe. It could be safer. And depending on what you look like and what you believe and who you love and who you vote for, possibly, you maybe have different things to worry about other than just putting on a pair of shoes. So I didn't want to use scare tactics to say running's not safe. We just want you to be safer. And that's really how I frame that with people who push back and say, they don't obviously say it on the record, but they're like, ooh, that's bad for business to say running's not safe. We want people buying our shoes and running our races. And like, time out. You have a responsibility to make sure that people traveling to your races and training for your races who are wearing your equipment are as safe as they could be, whether that's reflective gear, great. Whether that's just having conversations and creating spaces to talk about, hey, some people are less safe than others, and let's talk about that and be part of that solution, even though it's uncomfortable. And even I'm still wrestling with it. Again, I come from a place where my biggest fear is running and slipping on ice. That's a luxury I have. And I didn't always realize that. And I'm still realizing that.
So clearly John Honerkamp has a true passion for the true essence behind running and looks to improve the runner's experience for everyone. John, let me be the first one to thank you for shedding some much needed light on the importance of runner safety. It's clearly not something that we speak about enough, but we should do better. Follow John on Instagram at John Honerkamp and at RunKamp, which also has a website, runkamp.com. Once again, thank you, John, for all that you do for the running community.